text and words, so I just put up what is the best entertainment in Vegas. So you just type in whatever phrase or word that you think and put it up there. If you're not enjoying my presentation, I'd appreciate it if you saved it for the written part at the end and not do it to me while I'm standing up here. There you go. That's kind of weird. Okay. Okay. So from here on out, we're going to actually have some real questions. Somebody admitted to gambling. That's good. There's one honest person out there. Okay. Let's try this out. Okay. So what would you like to get out of today's sessions? This is the wrap-up session. So to the extent that you can put some things out there, I'll try to direct my comments and the other presenters' comments. We got 50 minutes till the cocktail reception starts. And I think I can get this out early. Okay, so you're a very easy crowd because there seems to be very low expectations. Yield. Well, that is something to talk about. Awake, there's still a coffee machine in the back. Feel free to get up, CPE, there's some issues. I think you're getting that. Ideas, good. Some of this stuff after the presentation, we'll probably put together a summary. Last year we put together a summary of everything and sent it out. If you didn't mind the email spam, so you can kind of see all the answers, you have to remember everything. I do not have any magic tricks. I cannot talk. I'm definitely not as magical as the previous presenter. I'm definitely not as funny as the first presenter. So I'm really in a hole here. Okay, so my first question is, we had a lot of discussion about macroeconomics, really almost two presenters on it. Certainly when we're out visiting clients, we present a lot on it. But my question is really how do you use that information? The first one, A, is it just sort of indirect foundational knowledge that you're basing a lot of decisions off of? Or do you actually take it to the next level based on the economic outlook? So you decide on equities versus bonds, which would be asset allocation. You use it to make duration calls, sector and security selection. You think about like the oil sector. When it became very volatile, that could have been a buying or selling opportunity, or is there some other use of it? That's kind of what I thought. I mean, I think the economics, both the presenters were excellent, two very good complementary styles. But it really is hard, I think, to take broad economic understanding and taking it into actual investment decisions. That's really kind of a difficulty there. It's a trick to do that. So based on the overall presenters, what would be your view of the equity market? I put in terms of just overweight, neutral, or underweight. So kind of, would you be more tempted to add equities right now? Or would you just kind of stay where you are, or would you go underweight? So really nobody's thinking right now is a good time to be selling your equities. And of course you have the question of what would you buy? Didn't hear a lot of favorable ideas about the bond market. there you go. Whoever wants to get rich, buy equities. That's your first real answer. So just sort of, this question kind of comes up a lot, or at least it seems like there's a lot more discussions about international markets, at least in the meetings I go to over the past few years. Which one of these countries do you think will have the greatest impact? Greece, Russia, Japan, China, or other? I think Greg had a very specific discussion point for this. Pretty overwhelmingly China. Okay, what word best, somebody turned that now. What word best describes Federal Reserve policy? Effective, experimental, unnecessary evil, or dangerous? I think in Marco's survey, one of the questions was on economic outlook and monetary policy, which I forget how it's worded, the number one concern. And this you can kind of see why. Nobody really knows how it's going to turn out. Nobody really agrees on even if it's been very good or how it's playing out. It's really going to be fascinating over the next 5, who knows, maybe 10 years. To see how that's going to play out. We really don't know. You have a world now with so many countries at 0 interest rates. That's just going to be a big question. So again, this is back to the open polling. What economic issue was raised today that is important to you? If there's a couple that I think come up that are interesting, or if there's a trend here, I could address it, or I'd certainly be happy to have one of the speakers talk to it. I thought we covered a wide variety of economic issues today. Does somebody want to talk to debt? Greg, are you still out there? I can't see anything from here. Okay.
Good. Luke? Yep.
Yeah. Pick one. Pick any one. They're coming fast.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to say, does anyone want a magic trick here? No. I'll say, on rates we talked a bit, and I think that's a lot of these things are interesting as they get back to rates. So whether about debt or some of the other things that are going on, there's a lot of things that ultimately come back to interest rates. And I would say, as we talked about, it's not just one market, it's a globally interconnected market, and so you can't just look at the U.S. and say, the U.S. is doing good, so rates should be rising. You have to sort of look at what's going on around the world, you have to look at central banks around the world, and then even in the U.S. market, you have to look at the different segments. And I really think there's going to be differences. There's so much pent-up demand. I'd be curious in this room, just by show of hands, if you're willing, how many people would say they are relatively short versus what they believe? Their asset duration is relatively short to their liability duration? By show of hands. How many people are long relative to their asset duration? Yeah, and again, I think in general, anecdotally, most of the people we talk to seem to be short. On one of the other things I do is I cover pensions. And on the pension side, the story there has been a lot of pensions that have had large buildups in their growth portfolios by being long equities, starting to get very nervous about equity valuations. And ideally, they're now back to almost fully funded levels. They would love to take that growth portfolio and turn it into a hedge portfolio, and basically defease their liabilities. but they're between a rock and a hard place, right? Interest rates are so low, they don't necessarily want to sell equities and buy fixed income right now, but equities have had such a big run up that they're getting very nervous about valuations there. So, what I keep hearing again and again and again is, well, once rates start to rise, they're finally starting to rise, that'll be my opportunity. And that very dynamic is gonna, I think, put a cap somewhat on any kind of long end rise, any significant rise.
Right, can I just add, the one other thing I saw come up here, I think you had a zero or low probability, but I had the question about, suppose we do get into a deflationary cycle here, or there's a global crisis. It feels like there's not a lot of policy options left for that scenario. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, on the crisis thing, you got to be careful, right? Because when we talk about crisis and when we think about crisis, I don't want to diminish in any way sort of the humanitarian elements of a crisis, right? There are all kinds of hotspots around the world where there's tragic things going on, but we're really looking at is sort of a crisis that leads to sort of a global financial disruption, right? So even when you saw things going on in Ukraine and whatnot, there's a lot of really terrible things going on, but what is going to happen is really going to lead to sort of worldwide markets pulling back significantly. And one of the interesting things that our economics team did is they looked at the percentage of the world that was, by some definition, at war. And if you think about sort of all these conflicts, civil wars, disruptions, whatever, there's a significant portion of the world right now that has significant unrest, something like 10% of the world. But if you look at the actual GDP of those areas around the world, it's like less than 1%. So, they get headlines, they're on the news, they're very important, they're stuff that we all should be concerned about as people. But as far as sort of economic effects, for the most part, a lot of the geopolitical conflicts, unless they disrupt a market like oil, they probably make a lot of noise and don't necessarily affect world markets. And so that sort of kept that probability low.
A lot of the interest rate comments, actually, we'll get to it later. There's several slides on that. I'm looking at the one that's just interesting about debt never really discussed with the deficit. In Peter's presentation, I found that kind of funny that, you have that slide that shows how the deficit keeps decreasing, but it sort of ignores the fact that we're still borrowing when debt's growing every year. It just feels like that to me, that's an issue that's there, but the markets pay attention to certain issues at a given time, and the U.S. debt right now is not a big issue. In fact, there's other countries, especially with what's going on in Europe, especially Japan, there's other countries now taking on more and more, they're easing their monetary policy. They're willing to do things that just the U.S. debt is just not an issue, but when it becomes an issue, it'll be a big issue again, but we're just not there. But I found that just interesting that, less deficit seems to be considered a positive because that we're running a surplus and actually reducing the debt. And maybe talks to that.
In fact, if I may comment on that, there's the concept of sort of stop versus flow, right? And there's the old saying, nobody ever got hurt from traveling too fast. You get hurt when you try to stop too quickly, right? And that's sort of physics. But right now there's obviously a massive debt. There's obviously massive central bank balance sheets. The big question is how quickly do those balance sheets unravel and how quickly do we try to change that debt? If everything happens relatively slowly, it's not such a big issue. So I think that's, when we focus on it, we really look at those changes more than the absolute levels.
Great. Okay. Keeping in mind the importance I'm getting to the reception, I'm going to keep moving here. Greg had talked on this, I just want to remember if anybody remembers the answer. Primary dealer bond inventories, what's been the trend? Have they been declining, have they been flat, have they been increasing? Wow, everybody's paying attention. That's really good. The next couple points are going to be on liquidity. I find this interesting. I think Greg had talked about, this is going to add more volatility.